thank y'all. Thank you for having me. Just start by saying I am not a historian. I've somewhat been dubbed that, I guess, around the office because I guess I've shown a little more interest in it than most of the rest of my generation. But I don't really consider myself a historian. But thank you for giving me a chance to come talk to you today. How many in the crowd have never heard of us and never heard of Clore Furniture? Okay? All right. Well, a little bit of background. What you see here, E.A. Clore Son, began as E.A. Clore and Sons. Became E.A. Clore Sons, which technically that's still the name of the company, but we go by Clore. So we've gone through those three names in the last 100 years, but it goes back much further than that, almost another 100 years, to about 1830. And the Clore family is a Germanna family from Second Settlement at Germanna. I'm thinking since I'm in Orange County, most of you are familiar with the Germanna settlement. So the Clore family came as the 1717 settlement at Germanna. Michael Clore was the immigrant. And it descended from him, settled in the Hebron Valley, and still there. But his great-grandson Moses Clore, born in 1787, he's the one that supposedly started making furniture around 1830. We don't have a lot of really any written records to speak of. But around 1830, he started making furniture in the area that is now somewhere Madison-Craiglesville area. His place that eventually at the intersection of, it's on the Robinson River Hill if you're familiar with the area, where the road leads off to go to Haywood. That farm right in the corner was the Clore home place, and that's where when we drop down to EA, that's where he was born and raised, and his father and grandfather made furniture there. So Moses Clore made the first recorded instance we have about 1831. He made a table and chair for Robinson River Baptist Church in Craiglesville for the clerk. A few years back I tried to track down whatever happened to that table and chair. And the clerk's house burnt in the late 1800s. And the best we can determine that the table and chair was probably in his house and burned in the fire. The congregation is no longer in existence. The building is still there. But one of the last surviving members of that congregation told me that there was a fire in the clerk's home there in Craiglesville in the late 1800s. And we just assumed that the first recorded pieces were lost in that fire. Just bringing you through the rest of the family, the lineage to myself. As you can see, Moses Clore had a son, James Osborne. James Osborne, two of his sons made furniture. E.A., Edward Ashby, E.A., and his brother, J.C. J.C. was also an undertaker, had Clore Funeral Home in Culpeper. Now, J.C. and E.A. worked together until 1921, and that's when E.A. built a shop at the current location. He passed the business on to four of his sons. Their sister was my grandmother. Lucy Frances Clore Coppage was my grandmother, one of EA's 12 children. And then my father, Billy, who's still working. He'll be 80 in a few months, but he's still there every day. Says he's retired, but he's still... his idea of retirement was to come in at about 6:45 instead of 6 o'clock every morning. And then I've been there since 1984. I was gifted this chair a few years ago, and it is supposedly a Moses Clore chair. It had belonged to my great uncle James O. Clore. It made its way to me here a few years back, and it sits in our office now. But that is one of the oldest pieces known to exist. And my dad has a rocker made by James Osborne Clore, which was Moses' son, E.A.'s father. And he's still got that rocker, and it has the all original parts and seat. Now, E.A., when he was 16 years old, unbeknownst to his father, made this little bureau which sits in our office. It's only about 20 inches wide, and overall, counting the mirror and everything, 30 inches tall. It's a miniature bureau. He made it secretly, hid it in a sawdust pile supposedly, so his dad, because he wasn't supposed to be using any of the machinery, and he showed it to his dad when he was done, and he approved. But it's said that sits in our office as well. That was handed down to EA's daughter, Dorothy Weaver, and it belongs to her son now. But we have it on display in our office. As I said, he built the first factory there in 1921. It burned in 1927. At that time, Madison didn't have a fire department, so the Orange Fire Department was called, but the shop was a total loss. My wife Karen, who I forgot to introduce, my wife Karen is here with us today too. She put this PowerPoint together, so the next slide is as big a surprise to me as it is you. But no, we do have the newspaper story, and it's a pretty interesting read of the way they wrote newspaper articles back then. That's just a little snippet from it. But yeah, the whole factory was lost in 27. And again in 30. It burned again. Once again, Orange Fire Department was called upon, but the entire factory was lost in 1930. Well, when the shop burnt in 1930, they were in the process of working on some furniture for Camp Rapidan, which is now known as Hoover's Camp. The Hoovers had purchased property in 29 to build a camp, and Mrs. Hoover came to get EA to build furniture for that. He had built some, and he rebuilt from the fire in 1930, and she loaned him $500 to help rebuild, to be paid back when or if he ever could. Well then, this is just a picture of him and his 12 children. I forgot to mention that he raised 12 children. EA and Alma, which she was known to the family as Big Mama, raised 12 children, 6 boys, 6 girls.
Wow.
And 4 of the boys are the ones that bought the business from their dad. The other 2 were house carpenters. And the girls were not allowed to be part of the business. So they all went on to various things. Most of them were homemakers throughout their lives. Of the 12, one, Blanche, is the only one that attended college. She went to Harrisonburg Teachers College, which is now part of JMU. And she taught school. She's the only one of the 12 that got a college education. And I like to brag, she was the center on the basketball team for that school. Got team pictures of her playing center on the basketball team for them. That's the shop that was built back after the fire in 1930. That's what's there today. The oldest part of the factory that's there today is that building. There's been some vinyl siding added to the front, but other than that, the structure is still there. It's just been added on 3 sides. Now, as I said, we were building furniture for Hoover's Camp. In 1931, Ms. Hoover ordered 2 more orders of furniture, bedding, and some various pieces to go into camp. All of this had been somewhat a mystery until maybe 10 years ago, and one of the Hoover historians was in town for Hoover Day at Hoover Ridge Park, and brought me 30-some pages of correspondence that he had copied in the Hoover Library between EA and Mrs. Hoover, and including these 2 invoices for items, a number of letters over the succeeding years. I guess at some point he sent her a ham. She liked the ham, so every Christmas she would order hams from him also. As I said, she loaned him $500. They've always been grown up hearing that story that I said 500, I meant 200. $200. Growing up hearing that story, it had been told anywhere from 100 to 500. Well, this verified it was $200. In 1938, he sent her this letter back in a Christmas card, along with $236, which was the interest on it he had calculated. She never cashed a check. And we always wondered if it just got lost in the shuffle, but the historian said that that was her way of being philanthropic. She would just never take money in repayment for money she had loaned. She would loan money and just not accept repayment. So we think it was intentional that she never cashed a check when he tried to repay her. Some of the workers in 39, a couple of those are a couple of my great uncles, but growing up around my grandmother, I love to cook today, and I got that from her. Back in the day, they fed all the workers lunch every day, and then some. And, you know, family of 12 children, they did a lot of cooking, and it was just normal that whoever was at the shop at lunchtime ate lunch. So my grandmother was a wonderful cook, and I tried to learn some of that from her, so I enjoy cooking to this day. As I said, fires in 27 and 30 destroyed the shop. 45 actually, right at the end of the war, there was a effort underway to start a fire department in Madison. And two of my uncles, James O. and D.L., Nat we called him, were charter members of the fire department. They helped organize that in 45. Supposedly a gentleman's agreement between Mr. John Brown and my Uncle Jimmy, that if Uncle Jimmy would help organize an effort to build a firehouse, then John Brown would take over as chief. And he did. They got the building built, and then my Uncle Jimmy took over as chief. And since 1952, either a member of the Clore family or someone who has worked for us has been chief of the Madison Fire Company. So we've been heavily involved with the fire department from the beginning. Now here it says he retired. That's a term to be used loosely. As I told you, my dad said he retired semi-retired in 09. He's still there 5 days a week, 6 on some weeks. That was a common pattern from EA. He said he retired in the 40s, but he was still making little items until he died. His sons were the same way. As each one retired, they still were at the shop most days, if not every day. Most of them had shops at home that they made things. Their nephews and sons and nephews, my cousin Edward Clore, who passed away year before last, he was almost 91 when he died, and he had things on his workbench he was still working on to sell in our showroom the week he died. So retirement is kind of a term we use loosely. As I said, he sold the business in 46 to 4 of his sons, James O., Nat, Lucian, and J.W. I grew up around my great uncles, spent a lot of time with each of them, helping them. They each did some farming. My Uncle J.W. on the left, the youngest, he really didn't do any farming, but spent a lot of time around them. And they each had their own unique ways about them, but just great people. Each one of them could give you an earful 1 minute, and the next minute, come on, let's go get something to eat. You know, that's the way they were. So they took over the business from their dad in 46, and at that time it was E.A. Clore. Up until that time, it was E.A. Clore and Sons. In 46, they dropped the and, so it became E.A. Clore Sons. Now, most people still try to put that and in there, but in 46, it became E.A. Clore Sons, and then they incorporated the partnership in 1960. And as I say, after his retirement, he still spent a lot of time at the shop. Spent a lot of time, I think, doing things for his grandchildren, because with 12 children, you wound up with a lot of grandchildren. So I think he spent a lot of time doing things with his grandchildren. And the 2 rockers that they're sitting in there now, I was fortunate enough to get one of those. It belonged, as it said, my cousin Edward passed away in 21. He had one of those 2 rockers, and I got that But one thing, when they died, their request was that they not have an auction. So everything they had was divided 12 ways between their 12 children. They had like a little lottery where each piece in the house was numbered, and then they had 12. You drew, it just rotated around somehow. Anyway, everything was divided evenly amongst the 12 families and distributed that way, and a good portion of that's still in the family, one of those 12 families today. In 1963, a reporter from the Washington Star came to do a news story on the shop. And my Uncle Jimmy later said he was scared to say too much because he was afraid she was going to expect money if he said, the report, he was going to expect money if I said too much. But anyway, they did this story, and it was a feature story in the Sunday paper. And that week, they said the mailbox just filled up with requests for catalogs and information. So things kind of really took off in '63 after this article. Now, if you were to walk up on that hill where he's standing, things look very much the same today as they did then. That the shop is still there. Not as much lumber packed up at the back because it's too expensive to stockpile that far ahead of time. But very little has changed since '63. January '85 is when the last one of the four brothers retired. My Uncle J.W. retired at the end of '84, and I can remember that's when I went to work. Christmas break, my first year of college. December went in to go to work. I had worked for my grandfather on my other side of the family until then. And when I came in that first morning, he looks at, well, Troy, I'm retiring at the end of the year, so I'm going to let Edward tell you what to do. And Edward looks at me and says, well, I'm going to start you like any other dude, man. You're making minimum wage. Now go over and Danny will tell you what to do. So that's when my dad is one standing in the door. His first cousin, Danny Clore, is kneeling. Sitting on the steps in the front is Edward Clore. And then Charles Ford, which we knew as Bootsy. Bootsy was a non-family member, but Bootsy worked for us from sometime in the 50s until he retired in, I can't tell you exactly what year, but in the 2000s. Of those four, my dad's the only one still living today. But anyway, Edward on the front was one taking over in '85, and then he and Danny and my dad each took turns as president of the company through 2009. Had a tragedy once again in February of '85. We had a sawdust bin exploded that burnt 4 men. One eventually passed from their injuries 3 months later. So it was a pretty significant explosion. Made a lot of changes to the way the sawdust is fed to the boiler since then. But that was a tragic day. That was somewhere around '09 when he was, say, quote, retiring. He still spends most of his days right there at that very bench. He enjoys being in the shop, enjoys making furniture, and that's what he does.
That's what makes him happy.
That's right. 2016, by the early 2000s on into 2010, in the teens, demand was down. We were struggling to sell it. Inventory was piling up, and we had done all we thought we could do, and we weren't going to go out of business in debt to anyone. So we made the decision that we were going to sell our inventory, take orders for those who wanted to place them, and then we would close up. The day we announced that, I think we had almost $750,000 inventory in the showroom, and 2 weeks later we had an empty showroom and an 8-month backlog. And pretty much have maintained an extensive backlog since then. In 2017 is when we finally decided, well, it looks like orders are going to continue to come in, so we'll give it a shot. And so far, it's working. we've been accused of doing this as a marketing ploy, but I can assure you it was not that. So in 2018, as part of, we said we'll see what we can do. We decided to just give the logo and the name a fresh look. So with the help of a firm out of Charlottesville, they came up with the new logo, and my wife rebranded as simply Clore. Over the years, like I said, people always try to put EA Clore and Son. Some people get the initials wrong, so we kind of simplified it to just Clore. And I think it's been well received. Very few people have had any complaints with the new logo, and we haven't changed what we're doing or how we're doing it, nor have we changed ownership. Just a fresh look, and that's something that Karen's came on. What year? 2016. 18. Okay. She started helping part-time in 2018 with marketing, and she had no marketing background, so it was on-the-job training, learn as you go. Like I said, we had employed a firm out of Charlottesville with some help with that, so it was all new to her, the family ordeal, and a lot of this is all new to her. She and I have only been together about 10 years, been married 9 years now, and she didn't come from the same background. I'm used to walking down the street and knowing most everybody I see and related to half of them. And she didn't grow up with the same family background, not the extensive family background. She moved in here from some place they call New Jersey. And it's all been new to her, seeing when I started explaining who's related to who and the connections, she just finally, okay. But she has taken on the task of marketing our product, which is something that we've done. Years ago we just didn't do. Word of mouth was it. We maintained a backlog simply by word of mouth. Lots of connections to schools, and word spreads. The University of Virginia and Woodbury Forest are two places that have been great customers of ours, and as people move on, they remember where the furniture came from anyway, and have come back. So now, as with a lot of things, the world's a lot smaller place. So whereas when I started work here in the 80s, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area was by far our largest market area. Now it's all over. We have delivered to the West Coast. She and I were fortunate to go to Whitefish, Montana with a load in 2016. So we were in San Antonio, Texas last summer. Getting ready to go to Santa Fe, New Mexico next month with a load. So it's all over the United States. Santa Fe is another good school. St. John's College, they have a campus in Annapolis, Maryland, and one in Santa Fe. They have been long-time customers. So, I say the view you would have seen 100 years ago is somewhat similar to the view you see today when you start down the hill. And if you're not familiar with it, a lot of people think, am I going to the right place? When they start down the hill, they're not quite sure if they're on the right road until they get to the bottom and see what's there. Likewise, the showroom looks very much like it would have looked in the 50s or 60s if you walked in. My grandmother always told me the story of growing up. They would push the furniture back and have dances in the showroom on occasion. And when my stepdaughter decided to get married last year, she decided she wanted to have the wedding at the shop, and we did that. We had the reception in the showroom. And it's been a number of buildings added on over the years, but the green building you see right kind of in the middle, that's the original part of the factory. It was built back in 1930. And a little aerial shot of the the factory today. And that's what I have. Does anybody have any questions?
How many employees? How many employees are working there?
We've got, I think it's 18 on site.
Okay.
And then we do, the chair seaters work from their own home. One thing I really haven't talked a lot about is, because most of you are familiar with what we do, but we still build the same, pretty much the same design furniture that we did, 100, 150 years ago. And, I can look around the room and see a lot of familiar faces that I have seen in our showroom, so I know a lot of you are familiar with what we make. But the chair seating is one thing that's not done on site. Chair seaters work from their own home, so we have a truck that goes around once a week, takes out the frames, picks up. Right now we just have 3 people seating chairs. That's one of the harder jobs it's been to fill, is getting chair seaters, because people think, well, this will be easy work, I can get paid to work at home, and as soon as they do it, their hands get sore and their arms get sore, they give up on it. So that's been a challenge, is chair seating is a challenge. Factory workers is a challenge, just like it is for most anyone here that's in business probably shares the same thing. Getting the workforce, our workforce is aging. Of our full-time employees, the vast majority of them have been there over 30 years. So we're facing retirement for a lot of them over the next, well, we have a number that could retire tomorrow if they want to. They're continuing to work, but we're going to be faced with a lot of retirements over the next few years, and the struggle is going to be replacing them. It's not something that everybody wants to do. Yes, sir.
Talk about gluing joints.
Okay. We again, the product we use now is a hide glue that's been in use for hundreds of years. If I'm not mistaken, it originated in China, and it's a hot melt glue. We rip the joints. If you're familiar with woodworking at all, we use a sawn edge rather than a jointed edge. If you joint that edge, it gets razor smooth, glassy smooth. The sawed edge, if you look at it closely, it has more surface area for the glue to make contact. So we use a hot melt glue, very traditional glue, to glue those joints. And the one big advantage of hot melt, the hide glue, is if you have to repair it, it will bond back to itself. Where a lot of your synthetic glues have to be cleaned down to bare wood, whereas the hide glues will bond back to themselves regardless of how old they are. And in our chair production, one thing we do different than a lot, our chair posts are not kiln dried. They are air dried, a little higher moisture content than the rungs. The rungs are kiln dried. Put it together, as over time that post continues to lose moisture, it helps keep the joints tight in the chairs.
You were talking about chair seaters. Are these cane?
It's rush is the actual name. Cane, the term cane, if you look familiar with one that has the holes, the real dainty looking, that's cane. Rush is a woven, it's a paper product, it's a fiber rush. It's a cord that's made from craft paper, actually, that's wound into a cord. Now, years back, probably at least 100 years ago, they offered a split bottom seat, the oak splits, oak or hickory splits. But I'm going to say at least the last 75 years have only offered the rush seats.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Where does all your walnut come from?
We buy all over. We buy local when we can. There was a sawmill here in Orange, Mike Wheeler. Some of you probably know Mike. The mill burnt. He didn't rebuild. We were buying a fair amount of walnut from Mike. Now it's wherever we can find it. We buy from local mills when we can find it, and then we buy from some of the larger lumber companies also. I recently found a mill in Harrisonburg that deals in quite a bit of walnut, so we've started working with him. The 4 primary woods that we use are walnut, cherry, oak, and mahogany. As I said, the cherry and walnut, we buy local when we can. Most of the oak we are able to find that locally. And mahogany, we use some African and some South American mahogany. And then we use some poplar for framework, which we generally buy from local mills. Yes.
Is the wood y'all use, is it all kiln dried?
Well, for the furniture, yes. We buy some already kiln dried, and we dry some ourselves. Years past, we pretty much would buy it all green and season it and dry it ourselves. Probably over the last 10 to 15 years, we're finding that quite often we can buy it kiln dried as cheap as we can dry it ourselves. Plus, you don't have to keep it on the yard so long. You know, for anybody familiar with drying wood, it's not an overnight process. It's a lengthy process to air dry it and then kiln dry it. So quite often we can buy it kiln dried cheaper than we can dry it ourselves.
How much is oak, walnut lumber bringing now per foot?
Top grade, about $8 a foot is what we're finding. Yeah, and
Because I got about 3,000 feet of it.
yes.
One other thing, I don't know whether y'all ever go to auctions, but if you ever go to an auction where Clore furniture is available, you're going to pay dearly for it, more than you can go to the showroom buy for some reason.
And that's something that for years it was routine that you would see furniture selling for more than new price. That has changed some over the last several years. The price has come down on the secondary market, and we've actually gotten into buying and selling some used furniture. You know, we're finding people. We're taking a lot of it actually. We're taking in on consignment. We're selling in our showroom the used pieces on consignment for folks. We have estates that are downsizing, and you know, people that are downsizing, and estates settling up that we'll take the furniture in if it's something we think we can move, and we have our area in the showroom for used pieces. Yes.
Hey Troy, if I were to walk into somebody's house or building or business, how could I tell that piece of furniture I'm looking at is Clore furniture? What's the symptoms about y'all
If you know, you know. We get asked that a lot, and a lot of the older pieces are not marked in any way. It's things that we just look for. Chairs, one thing to look for in the back of your post, a wooden dowel as opposed to a nail holding the slats in. Most other companies use nails, so a wooden dowel indicate if it's got a nail, we know it not ours. Now that's something we see on a regular basis. We do reseating for chairs that are not ours, but we see a lot of chairs come in that people just know they were made there, and we have to tell them there were at least 4 different Clores making furniture at one time that I know of. As I said, EA's brother JC made chairs. Now his chairs are very similar to EA's. And then there was a Clore and Hawkins factory in Brightwood, and there was an ON Clore in Culpeper. So there were 4 different Clores. So a lot of times somebody may have a Clore chair, but it's not an EA Clore. But since we're the only ones left, they just automatically assume we made them all. So we kind of have to educate people. But most of the time, looking at the overall design, construction, but there's no surefire way to know for sure. There are some pieces that the name was burned in, but probably a very small percentage that actually have a name on them, the older pieces. And then we started labeling them. Most of the case goods have a label, a sticker, starting in the 80s, I guess. And then when we rebranded, we try to make an attempt that we burn that logo into every piece somewhere now. With the exception of chairs, because there's just not a good place on a chair that's an inconspicuous place to label it. Yes, ma'am.
Will you refinish a piece of furniture that is not Clore?
We do some, yeah, as long as it's solid wood, not veneer. We do some restoration, refinishing work on pieces that we didn't make.
And the same will be for putting the bottom in a chair that's not
Right,
Clore.
we do, as long as it's a rush seat, yeah, we'll do
Yeah.
most any chair, yeah.
And my sister's been looking all over the place for somebody to do it.
Yeah, we do a fair amount of reseating on pieces that are not
Okay,
ours.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I've been told that, I don't recall which Clore, but one of them made clocks.
Yes, two of them actually.
Too, okay.
My great uncle, Nat Clore, the clock he generally made was a carriage clock, a square
Right.
case. Now, my cousin Edward Clore, he made the mantle clocks in a variety of shapes and sizes. He retired in '92, and from '92 till '01, he made them at home and sold them in our showroom. So there are a lot of clocks out there that Edward made and sold over the years. He made clocks, he made little jewelry boxes, little pedestal type necklace holders, the little sleigh, little decorative sleighs.
Oh, nice.
He stayed busy. Like I said, he was almost 91. He was still making those things at home selling. Yes.
I was wondering, at any point in your history, did anybody in your family think about making musical instruments?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. There was a gentleman in Madison who was well known for his rockers, Albert Ayler. And Albert Ayler made some musical instruments. He made some, to my knowledge, no.
You're still maintaining a pretty good backlog?
Yeah, on most of the larger pieces, we're running about a 6-month backlog.
The rockers in the photograph of your great-grandparents, I think, look very pale wood.
They were painted at that time, yes. Those two rockers had been painted. They had them painted and set on the front porch. Now, the one that I wound up with, anyway, yeah, they had been painted. My cousin Edward, who inherited the one, he stripped it and finished it back as a oak finish. So that's what's on it now, but at that time they were painted, yeah.
Yes, sir. You said your workforce is getting older. Have you ever thought about setting up an apprentice program through Madison County High School?
We talked about it, it's been several years ago, just didn't get much interest. We've seemed like we've tried a variety of things, but it's still working on that.
Any young Clores coming along?
Nobody in the generation beyond mine. My stepdaughter, Karen's daughter, is now working in our office. So as far as keeping it in the family, I think that's the best prospect right now. But yeah, Caitlin graduated college a few years ago and started into social work. Decided that wasn't for her, and I had my cousin retired in the office, and she decided to give it a shot. So that's working out great right now. But yeah, I've got two sons that have gone on to other things. One of them had to resort to being a lawyer, and but don't have any family members there, direct family members beyond my generation.
Well, there's, the current generation, they don't like what they call brown wood.
Right.
Yeah, you go into some of their houses and the decor, I call it early truck stop.
And I guess one little bit refreshing thing that I know Karen has noticed over the last couple of years, it seems to be we're seeing a few more younger couples come in with interest in the furniture. We've had some younger couples, DC area younger couples, which is something that we just really didn't see. Seems like we're seeing a few more, so maybe the brown furniture is making a comeback.
It is.
Hope so.
Yeah.
Has the furniture ever been compared to shape of furniture?
Some of the pieces, yeah, right, we have some pieces that do lend towards shaker. Mhm.
Did EA design most of what?
I guess so.
was made?
I know we don't have a lot of, it just word of mouth. I think most of them were probably designs that, yeah, he probably looked at something else and said, yeah, look, change this, change that. And then, of course, since I've been there, it's kind of new pieces have been added based on customer requests. So, we make a piece that somebody asked about and somebody else sees it. And so we've added several pieces, the sleigh bed being one of them, a panel bed that we're doing now that were additions. The other, I guess, difficult thing is home entertainment stuff. When we make furniture, of course, we're trying to make it to last generations. And in the home entertainment arena, what's popular today is obsolete in 5 years. So, back in the 80s, everybody wanted these big TV cabinets with pocket doors that are 2 feet deep. And, now, what good is it for the TVs out here today? So that's been something we've had to repurpose a lot of those into arm walls of some sort, change the pocket doors, put traditional hinge doors back on it, and make an arm wall of some of those cabinets. And same thing, we built a lot of computer furniture probably in the 90s and early 2000s, but now everything's on a tablet or a laptop, so nobody needs to store a desktop computer anymore. So it's been a little bit of a challenge repurposing some of those pieces.
How do you, what do you use to build from in terms of like designs? Is it, did somebody have a pattern, or is it nowadays is it on CAD, or how does that?
It's mainly, most of our standard catalog items are built from a bunch of jigs hanging around, jigs or written measurements, written in a book somewhere.
Yeah.
It's probably one of those things we need to do better at protecting and preserving the patterns of making a backup plan, having a backup plan there, because if we were to experience a fire today, it would, a lot of that would be gone. The newer custom pieces that people come in, a lot of those are just a basic drawing. With the basics are done on just a regular CAD sketch, but nothing detailed. But the majority of our patterns are a stick hanging up on the wall with some numbers written on it, and various patterns hanging around in the shop. Yes, ma'am.
You may have said this, and you've given me so many facts. Are any of the other Clore businesses still working?
No, ma'am.
They're all gone.
No, I believe the last one would have been Clore and Hawkins of Brightwood, and they went out in the early 70s. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
From start to finish, how long does it take to make a chair?
Well, good question. It's depends on the chair for one thing. Now, as far as number of man hours, it's hard to pinpoint because we're making in such volume. When we make a particular style chair, we may be making 50 at one time. And in doing, years ago, we did some home shows, Richmond and other places, and a lot of smaller woodworking shops would always talk about chairs. A lot of mom and pop shops, they don't want to fool with chairs because there's so many jigs you have to make and just things unique about a chair as opposed to a piece of furniture. So we have the benefit of making them in enough volume, but the process, any of the parts that need to be bent, they are basically boiled. We call it steam bending, but the parts are put in a tank, submerged, and the water's boiled. Then they're bent into whatever shape. The posts are bent and the slats for the back are bent, put in a stock to hold them in that shape. And then they're allowed to dry. So that's, as far as timing, that takes time, weeks, for that to dry to the point that it'll hold its shape. The back slats, we can put them in the kiln and they'll dry in a matter of a week or so. But the posts have to stay in those stocks for a matter of weeks. Then the frame is put together. Then, if it's a rocker or armchair, the frame's put together without the rockers or the arms on it. It's stained, and we put a primer clear coat on it. Then it goes out to be seated. Then it comes back, and we put the arms and rockers on it because it makes it easier on the person to weave the seat if it doesn't have rockers or arms. So it's a pretty lengthy process. The number of hours, it's almost impossible to say, but the process itself takes time because of all those steps involved, and especially waiting on the lumber to dry.
All that stuff is done over there.
Everything's done on site with the exception of putting the seat in. Yeah.
And on, you say you do some refurbishing work?
Mm-hmm.
Like little footstools, webbing, and
Yeah. Anything with a seat.
I've got an old, I think it's a Clore that's got the flat.
The split bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't do those, but we could put a rush seat in it for you, but we don't
Okay.
offer the split bottom seats. Yes, ma'am.
Does the age of your piece dictate the value necessarily?
Not necessarily. It's really, some pieces, yes. You know, some pieces, when you start getting into the really old pieces, will up the value. Unless it's a true, a real antique, then it's more based on the condition.
Transverse oak notwithstanding, are you having trouble finding oak now?
Oak is not, it has not been hard to find.
Oh, okay.
Now, the price of white oak has gone through the roof. We use very little white oak. We use white oak for some of the seat rungs, which is going to be covered with cord. It's a little bit stronger, but most of our oak is red oak. But white oak, the price several years back, and I think that's been mainly driven by the whiskey barrel industry, has driven white oak prices up.
I know there's something called an oak decline that's going on, and a lot of oak trees are dying. A lot of them are dying.
Yeah, so far the oak we haven't been hurt on being able to find it or priced too bad on the red oak. Yes.
Do you use any veneers or it's all solid?
All solid. Now we do, I mean, the drawer bottoms are a plywood product, and the very back, it goes in, so the unseen backs are plywood, but the actual product itself is all solids.
That's gotta be rewarding.
It is, yeah, it's you know, probably something I take for granted because that's all I've ever known.
So what's your best-selling piece?
Probably, I see one sitting there, it might be ours, a plain side chair, just what we call a mule deer or thumb back chair. That chair is probably our most popular item. And then the footstools, of course, are really popular for wedding gifts. A lot of customers that regularly purchase footstools for wedding gifts. So they're probably the two single most popular items.
Troy, in your marketing, what percentage of your sales might be generated through the internet? Can you tell?
I don't have a number, but I would still say it's relatively low. If word of mouth sales still make up the vast majority of everything we sell. You know, we do get some new customers in that have seen, you know, through social. The majority of our advertising is through social media right now, and I would say that still the vast majority find out about it through word of mouth.
Can anyone just go over to your plant and just see things?
Showroom. We have a showroom at the factory. Now you can't go in the factory itself. Now, the last couple of years, once a year, we haven't set the date for this year. We've been doing an open house. We had the 100th anniversary in September of 21, and we had an open house last November, and we're planning one for this fall. And during the open house on a Saturday, we will offer factory tours, but we don't allow people in the factory during regular working hours. But we will be advertising another open house for this fall, and we'll have been doing some limited edition pieces that we offer that day, and have some refreshments and factory tours and hay rides and things like that. So this fall we will be having that again.
Make sure you let us know when
Yes,
that's happening.
please.
So Troy, I got one more question, just so I can kind of get in my mind in terms of the scale of your production. In a typical year, how many individual pieces, not value of pieces, how many individual pieces do y'all typically produce?
I would say we're probably, right now, I would say right around 2,000 to 3,000 ballpark. Now that, in its heyday in the probably late 70s, early 80s, when we had about 50 employees, it was considerably more. But yeah, it's a few thousand pieces, counting chairs and furniture.
All right,